George had always been the kind of man others looked up to. At 80 years old, he still walked every morning, sharp and steady, with a quiet pride in his step. Neighbours waved. Some younger men even said, "I hope I'm half as strong as George when I get to that age." But one chilly autumn morning something changed. George was stepping out onto his porch the same way he had every day for the past 20 years, coffee in hand, breakfast already done. But before he could take his first step toward the sidewalk, his leg buckled. He fell hard. Not the kind of fall you just brush off. His hip ached, his hands trembled. The pain lingered. He sat there on the wooden steps, stunned more by confusion than pain. What had just happened? He hadn't slipped. He wasn't dizzy. But he could feel it. His legs weren't strong enough anymore. The EMTs came. So did his son, Michael, who looked more alarmed than George had ever seen him. At the hospital, tests were done. Scans, blood work, strength assessments. The doctor looked at George with a furrowed brow. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "you've lost nearly 20% of your muscle mass in the past 2 years. You're experiencing something called sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss." George was stunned. He'd never smoked, hardly drank, walked every morning. He always ate breakfast. A healthy one, he thought, low-fat yogurt, a bowl of cereal, orange juice. But then the doctor asked one question that changed everything. "George, can you walk me through exactly what you've been eating for breakfast each day?" He paused. It seemed like such a small thing. But in the days that followed, George would come to realize that his decades-old breakfast routine wasn't keeping him strong. It was slowly making him weak. And that realization would change everything. George Thompson had lived in the same quiet suburb of Dayton, Ohio, for over 40 years. His small brick house, neatly kept with trimmed hedges and a rocking chair on the front porch, was a reflection of the man himself, orderly, dependable, and disciplined. He was a retired Air Force mechanic, a man of routine. At 80 years old, George still lived alone, cooked his own meals, and took pride in never needing help. He paid his bills on time. He folded his clothes with military precision. He never missed his 6:30 a.m. walk around the block, even in the cold. To those who knew him, George was the picture of aging well. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, but there was strength in his quiet consistency. And if you asked him the secret to his independence, he'd often smile and say, "You just got to take care of yourself. Eat right, keep moving." Every morning for over 30 years, George followed the same breakfast ritual. He'd wake up at 5:45 a.m., just before the sun came up. He'd stretch his arms, make his bed, then head to the kitchen. There, he'd prepare what he proudly called a clean breakfast. A bowl of bran cereal, high fibre, he liked to say. A glass of orange juice, vitamin C is good for the immune system. And a single-serving cup of low-fat vanilla yogurt, because full-fat stuff clogs your arteries. He'd eat it slowly while watching the weather, wash his bowl, put everything away. It was a routine he trusted, something that made him feel in control. George didn't eat fast food, he rarely had sweets, and he'd never touched a protein shake or muscle supplement. He believed in the basics, real food, whole grains. He thought he was doing everything right, so when his body started feeling different, more tired in the mornings, slight stiffness in his knees, a lingering soreness after yard work, he assumed it was just age catching up. "Comes with the territory," he told himself. He never imagined it could be his breakfast. After all, breakfast was the one thing he never changed. It had gotten him through retirement, through losing his wife, through the long pandemic months when isolation crept in. That quiet bowl of cereal, that cold glass of juice, it was comfort. But comfort, he would soon learn, can sometimes be the enemy of progress. And while George had kept every other part of his life sharp and strong, he had unknowingly fallen behind in the one area that mattered most, nutrition for muscle health. He didn't know it yet, but that familiar morning routine, so small, so ordinary, was slowly eroding the strength he had spent a lifetime building. At first George didn't think much of it. A little stiffness in the morning, a bit more time needed to get up from his recliner. Muscles that once responded quickly now felt slower. Still, he chalked it up to being 80. He was lucky, he told himself. Other men his age were in wheelchairs or taking daily medication. He could still climb stairs, cook meals, rake the leaves, but over time, something began to shift. That daily walk around the block he once enjoyed started to feel more like a chore. His legs burned faster, his steps were shorter, he found himself breathing heavier halfway through. Then came the soreness. After simple yard work, just trimming hedges or pulling weeds, his arms would ache for days. His knees protested every time he crouched. Even getting out of bed took more effort than he liked to admit. It wasn't just physical either. His energy felt drained. By 10 a.m. he needed to sit down. By afternoon he felt foggy and irritable. He wasn't himself. George mentioned it to his son Michael one Sunday after church. "I think I'm just getting old, that's all," he said with a weak smile. Michael didn't agree. He had noticed the change. "You've looked tired lately, Dad. Not like before." George waved it off. "It's nothing serious. I'm still eating right. Walking every day. You know me." But a week later, everything changed. That morning fall on his front steps shook him and everyone around him. George hadn't tripped. There was no ice, no dizziness. His legs had simply failed to support him. At the hospital, doctors ran scans. They checked his bones, his balance, his heart. Nothing abnormal, until they reviewed his muscle mass. One doctor, a younger woman with a calm but firm voice, came into his room with a chart. She sat down beside George's bed. "Mr. Thompson," she began, "you've lost nearly 20% of your lean muscle in just under 2 years. That's not just age, that's sarcopenia. It's very common in seniors, but most people don't notice it until something like this happens." George blinked. "I thought I was healthy. I eat breakfast every day. I walk. I don't eat junk." She nodded. "That's good. But what you eat matters as much as what you avoid." He felt a wave of shame, confusion, even defensiveness. "You're saying I did this to myself?" "Not intentionally," she replied. "But it's very possible that your breakfast, what you've been eating all these years, hasn't been supporting your muscles. In fact, it may have been weakening them." That didn't make sense to George. He'd always believed in moderation. Cereal, yogurt, juice. That's what the magazines used to recommend, wasn't it? Still, something about her tone made him listen. "Do you mind walking me through your typical breakfast?" she asked. George sighed. "Bran flakes, low-fat yogurt, orange juice, sometimes a banana." The doctor nodded slowly. She took a few notes. "Let's take a deeper look at that," she said. George didn't realize it then, but this conversation would be the turning point. The moment he began to see that eating breakfast and fueling your body are not always the same thing. What he thought was healthy, clean eating was missing the very nutrients his aging body desperately needed: protein, healthy fats, fiber that slows digestion, nutrients that build, not just maintain, muscle mass. That fall on the porch was just a symptom. The real problem had been building silently over time, in the most familiar place of all, his kitchen. Back at home, George sat at his kitchen table, the same table where he'd eaten thousands of breakfasts over the past 3 decades. But now he looked at his cereal box differently. What once felt like a safe and reliable choice now felt suspicious. He took out his usual items, bran flakes, the small bottle of orange juice, and his low-fat yogurt. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He read the labels, carefully. The cereal boasted heart-healthy and high in fiber. But right under the claims he saw the truth. 12 grams of sugar per serving, not including the milk. The orange juice said 100% juice in big bold letters, but in fine print it showed 25 grams of natural sugar in just 1 glass. No fiber. The yogurt said low fat and light, but it had 10 grams of added sugar and only 5 grams of protein. George sat back in his chair. This had been his daily breakfast, and without knowing it, he had been starting every single day with a sugar load of nearly 50 grams, little to no protein and almost no healthy fats. The very nutrients his body needed most. Protein to build and maintain muscle, fats to support joint health and energy were missing. And all that sugar. The doctor had explained that sugar without fiber enters the bloodstream rapidly, causing spikes in blood sugar and insulin. These spikes are followed by crashes, leaving the body feeling fatigued, inflamed and undernourished. For younger people, the body might bounce back quickly. But in seniors, especially those over 70, these sugar swings are more dangerous. They accelerate muscle loss, contribute to insulin resistance, and worsen inflammation, particularly in joints. George remembered the doctor's words clearly. Your breakfast isn't fueling your muscles, it's draining them. She explained that sarcopenia, the age-related loss of muscle mass, affects over 30% of people over 60, and up to 50% by age 80. But here's what shocked him most. Most of it is preventable, she said, but only if we feed our bodies the right nutrients, especially first thing in the morning. And George hadn't been feeding his body. He had been feeding a routine, not a purpose. The healthy foods he trusted had been chosen decades ago. They hadn't changed, but his body had. Back in the 1980s, low-fat yogurt was all the rage. Carbs were encouraged, cholesterol was feared, but the science had shifted. Now, experts understood that older adults need more protein, not less. They needed healthy fats, like those from avocados, nuts and eggs, to absorb vitamins and support brain health. They needed whole foods with fibre, not refined carbs that spike and crash. But George's breakfast was stuck in the past. It was a perfect storm of outdated advice. 1. Sugary cereal, refined grains, added sugars, little to no protein, causes rapid blood sugar rise, then crash, no satiety, no muscle support. 2. Orange juice, no fibre. High natural sugar, quick spike in glucose, zero impact on satiety, no protein, no fat. 3. Low-fat yogurt stripped of fat, sugar added for taste, low in protein, leaves you hungry, no sustained energy. George began to connect the dots. The mid-morning fatigue, the joint stiffness, the loss of muscle strength. They weren't just age. They were the result of a body that wasn't getting what it needed. It had nothing to build with. No bricks, no mortar, just empty calories disguised in health marketing. And George wasn't alone. His neighbour Fred still drank a fruit smoothie every morning, mostly juice and banana. His friend Tom swore by toast and jelly. All of them thought they were eating clean. None of them were feeding their muscles. George remembered what the doctor said at the end of their meeting. The good news is it's not too late. Muscle can be rebuilt. Strength can return. But you have to give your body the right materials. That sentence stuck with him, because for the first time in months it gave him something he hadn't felt in a while. Hope. The fall had left more than a bruise on George's hip. It had cracked something deeper, his confidence. For the first time in his life he felt uncertain on his feet. Even after the pain subsided, a quiet fear remained. He moved more cautiously, avoided the front steps, and even skipped his morning walks for a while. And that fear? His son Michael noticed it right away. One evening, Michael sat down at George's kitchen table. He had brought over dinner, grilled chicken, roasted vegetables and brown rice, and was carefully watching his father eat. "Dad," Michael began gently, "I've been thinking." George looked up. "I don't think you should be living alone anymore." The words hit harder than George expected. He set his fork down slowly. "You think I can't take care of myself?" Michael hesitated. "No, I'm saying it's getting harder, and I don't want to wait until something worse happens. Maybe it's time to think about assisted living, somewhere with people to help, just in case." George said nothing. His jaw tightened. The idea of moving into a facility, into a place where people were checked on, managed and looked after, felt like defeat, like the world was closing in. He had always prided himself on being independent, capable, in control. Now, because of one fall, his son thought he was fragile. But deep down, George understood why. He wasn't as strong as he used to be. He was tired more often, weaker. He couldn't deny that. Still, the thought of leaving his home, his routines, his independence, it was too much. That night, as he lay in bed, George replayed the doctor's words again in his mind. Sarcopenia is reversible. With the right nutrients and movement, muscle comes back, even in your 80s. That sentence stood out now, brighter than the rest, because for the first time George saw a choice in front of him. Not an easy one, but a real one. Give in to the slow decline. Accept the chairlift, the walker, the safety of a monitored home, or fight back, not with pride or stubbornness, but with intention. Maybe he didn't need more medications. Maybe he didn't need more rest. Maybe he just needed more fuel. He sat up in bed, reached for the small notebook on his nightstand, and he began to write. A new morning plan, one with eggs, avocado, oatmeal, berries, Greek yogurt, no more cereal, no more orange juice, no more light foods that left him drained. He scribbled one line across the bottom of the page: "I will not give up what I can still rebuild." It wasn't about vanity, it wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about reclaiming the one thing he was most afraid of losing: control. Because if he could walk again with strength, if he could move without fear, if he could keep his home, his porch, his morning walks, then maybe aging didn't have to mean fading. Maybe it could mean changing direction. George didn't overhaul everything at once. He started small. The next morning, instead of reaching for his usual cereal box, he took out a small pot and boiled water. He stirred in half a cup of steel-cut oats, just like the doctor had recommended. At first, it felt strange. The oats didn't taste sweet. They were dense, chewy, but he added a few blueberries, a splash of almond milk, and a tablespoon of ground flaxseed. Then he opened a new carton of full-fat Greek yogurt. It was thicker than the kind he used to buy, creamier, more filling. He added a handful of walnuts and a few raspberries. For the first time in years, he skipped the orange juice. Instead, he drank a full glass of water with a squeeze of lemon, and surprisingly he felt satisfied. There was no sugar crash, no foggy feeling. Just energy. By the third day he added eggs to the mix. He scrambled 2 in olive oil, tossed in some spinach, and topped them with avocado. It was a breakfast he'd never imagined himself eating before, but one that made him feel full, focused, and fueled. He began to notice little changes. His mid-morning fatigue vanished. The aches in his knees started to ease. He began walking again, slowly at first, just halfway around the block. Then the full loop, then twice. His balance improved. He could stand longer in the kitchen without feeling the need to sit. Even his mood lifted. The irritability that had crept into his mornings was gone. He felt calmer, more present. And every week George made another small change. He switched his white bread for sprouted whole-grain toast. He replaced his afternoon crackers with a hard-boiled egg or a handful of almonds. He began drinking more water throughout the day. 3 weeks in, he met again with his doctor. She was visibly impressed. "You've gained nearly 3 pounds of lean muscle," she said, scanning his chart. "Your strength readings are up, and your blood sugar is much more stable." George smiled. It wasn't a boastful smile, but a quiet one, the kind that comes from reclaiming something you thought was lost. He told her about his new breakfast, how he had traded sugar for strength, how the hardest part wasn't the food, it was letting go of old habits. "You didn't just change your diet," she told him. "You changed your direction." That afternoon, George called his son. "You still think I need to move into assisted living?" he asked. Michael hesitated. "Honestly, no. I think you're doing better than I've seen in months." George laughed. "I'm not done yet." Over the next few weeks, George kept going. He joined a local senior walking group at the park. 3 mornings a week he showed up with a smile, walking a steady pace alongside others 10 or 15 years younger. He became known for his energy and his breakfast tips. Whole grains, protein, good fats, he'd say. That's the real medicine. By the 3rd month, something remarkable happened. He no longer feared the stairs, no longer held onto the railing for balance. He was stronger, not just physically but mentally. He felt like himself again, and more than that, he felt like a version of himself he hadn't seen in years, not just surviving, thriving. George wrote in his notebook again on the last page, 3 months, 1 breakfast change, a stronger me. And when a friend from church asked what his secret was, George didn't talk about pills or supplements or fitness routines. He simply said, "I started eating like my muscles mattered." By spring, George was no longer just another senior taking morning walks in the park. He had become something more, a quiet leader. He wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but everyone noticed something different about him. His posture, his energy, the way he listened, and the way he moved without hesitation. He became a regular at the community centre's healthy aging group, not because he needed support, but because others began turning to him for advice. At first, it was just casual conversation. A woman named Irene asked what kind of cereal he ate, and George chuckled. "I don't," he said. "I retired that box the same day I started rebuilding my strength." She looked puzzled. "But I thought cereal was good for you?" George smiled gently. "So did I for 30 years. But turns out sugar doesn't care how old you are, it just does the damage quietly." Soon a small group began gathering after each walk, curious about George's routine. He started bringing a few handwritten notes to share. Simple tips, breakfast swaps, foods that made him feel full and energized. People listened, not because he was a doctor, not because he used fancy terms, but because they could see the difference in him. They had watched him go from limping, tired and unsure, to strong, steady and bright-eyed. And that transformation spoke louder than any medical article. At a Tuesday gathering, the coordinator asked if George would share his story with the group. He stood up slowly, holding his notebook. "I thought getting older meant getting weaker," he began. "I thought feeling tired, losing strength and falling was just part of the deal. But it wasn't. It was a wake-up call." He told them about the fall, the diagnosis, the quiet fear of losing his independence. Then he spoke about breakfast, how something so ordinary had played such a powerful role in his decline and in his recovery. "I didn't need a miracle," he said. "I needed protein. I needed healthy fat. I needed to stop eating like I was 30 and start eating like my body needed building, not just maintenance." The room was quiet. Some nodded, some scribbled notes, some just stared, considering their own routines. George closed his notebook and smiled. "I'm not perfect. I still miss the taste of my old yogurt sometimes. But every time I choose the food that fuels me, I gain something more important than taste. I gain strength. I gain control. And I'm not giving that up." After the talk, people approached him, thanked him, asked him for recipes. One woman even said, "You've given me hope." George didn't expect to become a role model, but in sharing his truth he became just that, a reminder that even in our 80s change is possible, that the path to strength isn't through struggle, but through small choices repeated each day, and that sometimes the most powerful change comes from the simplest place, your own kitchen. These days, George still eats his breakfast by the kitchen window. The view hasn't changed. The porch, the tree in the front yard, the same quiet street. But everything else is different. He moves with ease. His mornings are no longer drained by fatigue, but filled with quiet strength. The man who once sat on the porch in pain now walks the neighbourhood with purpose. And every morning, as he stirs his oatmeal or cracks an egg into the pan, he remembers something simple. Aging isn't about surrendering, it's about adapting. Too many people believe that growing older means losing the life you love, losing your freedom, your strength, your choices. But the truth George discovered is far more hopeful. You don't need to fight time, you just need to fuel yourself for the road ahead. Because muscles don't vanish overnight, energy doesn't disappear without a cause, and strength, even in your 80s, can return if you give it what it needs. The real lesson? Longevity is not just about living longer, it's about living stronger. With one small change, a better breakfast, George took back his independence, his movement, his confidence, and perhaps more than anything else he took back his voice. The ability to say, "I choose how I age." So if you're watching this and you've felt tired, stiff or weak lately, maybe the answer isn't more rest. Maybe it's just a new beginning, one plate at a time. Eat like your future depends on it, because it does.